Friends, welcome to our guest speaker series with Dr. Nader Saiedi for the Dawnbreakers. I really wanted to begin with kind of a unique introduction. And I found this paragraph from Baha'u'llah, and it's in Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah, and it's 56. So if you want to maybe just research it and read it in its entirety, feel free. But this is all about Dr. Saiedi. Respect ye the divines and learned amongst you, they whose conduct accords with their professions, who transgress not the bounds which God hath fixed, whose judgments are in conformity with his behests as revealed in his book. Know ye that they are the lamps of guidance unto them that are in the heavens and on the earth. They who disregard and neglect the divines and learned that live amongst them, these have truly changed the favor with which God hath favored them. Please join me in welcoming our illustrious speaker, Dr. Nader Saiedi.
Thank you very much. The very beautiful passage which was read by dear Nader, in fact, has nothing to do with me. That one talked about the people who are defined in terms of not only knowledge, but also deeds and the correspondence of knowledge and deeds together. And that's an ideal that all humanity should strive for, and no particular human being can be a complete expression of that. So we are in the Baha'i faith, we are all scholars of the faith. We don't have clerics, and we all have to try to become manifestations and expressions, embodiments of those ideals, those values that knowledge of the faith brings for us. In any case, I was invited to this meeting, and today, now I have understood that this is the third time that I'm invited to these classes on Dawnbreakers that dear Nader has been arranging. I decided that in this session, I'll talk in general about the worldview of the Bab, theology of the Bab. And then in thinking of how to approach that, I thought about a number of options. And when I was coming to the campus, this is my office at UCLA, I changed my mind, and I decided to discuss the worldview of the Bab, the theology of the Bab, by discussing and analyzing some of the titles of the Bab. So that I thought that it would be interesting in a sense to know some of the titles of the Bab and also the meanings of these titles, which becomes that worldview, that theology, philosophy of the Bab. So in discussing the worldview of the Bab, I'm going to briefly talk about 5 of his titles. Of course, his titles were in Persian and Arabic, and so they have to be translated into English. And so sometimes it becomes a bit more difficult. But the titles 5 titles I thought that I would talk about it. One is, of course, the Bab, the most famous one, which means the gate. And the other one is primal will. Primal point. So the Bab as the point, or as the primal point. And another one is, of course, remembrance. that we are very much familiar with this particular title as well. And the other one is, we usually say the most exalted, but in Arabic and Persian, which is not prevalent in English, a frequent title of the Bab is Rabbi A'la, which means the most exalted Lord. So it is not only the most exalted, but also Lord, Rab. And finally, a title that the Bab himself frequently refers to himself, particularly in his work, Persian Bayan and Arabic Bayan, is what can be translated as the possessor of 7 letters. His name is Ali Muhammad. That was his name. And in Arabic, Ali consists of 3 letters, and Muhammad consists of 4 letters. So his name, which is Ali Muhammad, consists of 7 letters. And so he's frequently called by himself in a number of his works as the possessor of, or the Lord of 7 letters. But it's more than just that his name, Ali Muhammad, consists of 7 letters. So I'm going to talk about these 5 titles that I have chosen for the Bab, and to discuss the meaning and the symbolic message of these titles. And through that, we would have hopefully a picture, an image of the philosophy and theology of the Bab. Let me begin with the most famous one, the Bab. The word Bab, which means the gate, consists of 3 letters, B, A, and B. Some of the words in Persian or Arabic, when it is written, transliterated in English, they change a little bit because vowels are not the same in terms of Arabic and English. So sometimes vowels should be included or excluded. But in the case of the Bab, it's exactly the way that it is written in Persian or Arabic. So it is B-A-B, Bab. Now, Bab means gate. And of course, there is a historical, mystical, religious, theological background for this concept, including in the Quran. Frequently it is mentioned. And among the Shia Islam, it was also an important concept. In the hierarchy of spiritual beliefs, whether there is God, and then there's prophet of God, and then there are successors of the prophet. After that, sometimes they talk about the gate or Bab as a person who would be the representative of those successors among the people, or in a sense, the true believer. So there is a background for this concept of the Bab, and also it is mentioned frequently in more general symbolic terms in the Quran. But in the writings of the Bab, this word gate, the Bab, becomes vehicle or symbol of infinite spiritual, mystical, theological ideas. So I'll mention very briefly the most important of of this. Just as the word Bab consists of 3 letters, B, A, and B, and the way it is written, A in Arabic or Persian is just one vertical line. A, letter A, is one vertical line. And B is one horizontal line in Persian or Arabic. B is a horizontal line, and A is a vertical line. So when you write the Bab, the word Bab, as it is written, becomes 2 horizontal lines which are connected together through a vertical line. And in some of the writings of the Bab, that becomes also a symbol of the cross, the Christian cross. And therefore the Bab takes it as the symbol of Trinity, the concept of Trinity. And sometimes he argues that the truth of Trinity is presented, is symbolized in the meaning of Bab, in the meaning of gate. Now, what is the main meaning of this Bab, consisting of these 3 letters? According to the Bab, all reality, including the reality of the prophets of God, those that Baha'is usually call manifestations of God, all prophets of God, but not only them, but also all reality, everything which exists, is defined by 2 different aspects. And so the reality of everything becomes the unification, the linking of these 2 different binary aspects. The Bab calls one of them divinity. And the other one, he calls it servitude. So divinity, of course, refers to God, and servitude refers to the creation and servant of God. So for the Bab, everything that exists, including the prophets of God, everything that exists has 2 aspects. One aspect is divinity. Namely, all of us, our truth is reflection of God. We have divinity within ourselves, everything, all trees, all atoms, all fires, all living entities, everything, mountains, everything has 2 aspects. The aspect of divinity is the reflection of God within it. Everything is the image of God. Everything is made in the image of God. We are familiar with this concept, of course, from the first page of Torah, that God says that God decides to create human beings in his own image and like. For the Bab, that truth is, of course, in the most exemplary fashion manifested in the case of human beings, but also it is the reality of all beings. All beings are the image of God. And this being the image of God, being reflection of divine names and attributes, that is the most important expression or aspect of reality. That is the truth of all reality. But at the same time, all reality, everything is different from everything else. I'm different from you guys, and we are all different from mountains and oceans and so on. So what defines us as separate from each other is our particular essence, particular characteristics. And this defines us as a finite entity. We are a finite being, limited, and therefore different from other things. So our finite character refers to our servitude, the fact that we are created by God and we are servant of God. But at the same time, we are reflection of divine names and attributes. And in that sense, within us, what can be seen in terms of our truth is nothing but utter divine unity. And so in terms of our character as the image of God, as the reflection of divine names and attributes, as a manifestation of God, not with capital M, which is the title in Baha'i religion for prophets of God, but with a small m. Everything is manifestation of God. Everything is reflection of divine names and attributes. In that sense, everything is one. And in everything, divine unity can be seen. But in terms of our finite created character, in terms of our servitude, we are finite being different from other beings. And so from the point of view of the Bab, this fundamental contradiction of infinity and finitude, we are infinite because we are reflections of God, and at the same time, we are a finite being, a specific being. In many of his writings, he defines the first one as existence, and the second aspect as essence. So our reality is defined by the unification, coming together of existence and essence, or divinity and servitude. And togetherness of these two, these oppositions, defines the reality, the being of everything. So for anything to be, existence and essence should come together. And that means coming together of divinity and servitude. And this is this fact, namely the structure of all beings, the reality of all beings, is symbolized by this word, the Bab. Bab consisting of letter B. The first letter B symbolizes divinity. And the second letter B symbolizes servitude. And the letter A, which connects the two B's, becomes unification and linking and coming together, the unity of divinity and servitude. Now, when you look at the word Bab, of course, what it means is gate. And what is the function of the gate? A gate is something which connects two different aspects, outside and inside, right? It is through the gate that we find access to a house, to a building, or to a garden, or another reality, which is different from our immediate reality, right? So gate is something which connects outside and inside. And in this case, this outside becomes divinity, which is our truth. And then this inside becomes our finite character, our servitude. And the concept of the gate then symbolizes the connection, coming together of finite and infinite reality, servitude, and divinity. So when my particular characteristics becomes a vehicle for expression of unity, then my ultimate reality is becoming manifest, and I'm truly a gate. This is very important, not only theologically, but also sociologically, politically. One of the most important questions in sociology, political philosophy, and so on right now in the United States, everywhere, is this concept of identity. What is our identity? What is our true identity? And unfortunately, because the world has turned into a materialistic direction, and by the way, that became the most pronounced in the same year that the Bab declared his mission. The Bab declared his mission in 1844. That date, that particular year, is really the time of turning point of the world into direction of materialistic philosophy. You see that 1844 is the date that Nietzsche is born, who talked in all his writings of the death of God, and argued that there exists no God, and argued that since there is no God, there can't be any value and everything is permitted. At the same time, 1844 is the time that Marxism as a philosophy, as a sociology is born. It is late 1843, 1844 that Marx develops his theory, which is called Dialectical Materialism or Historical Materialism. And all is based upon a materialistic philosophy in which not only God and spiritual values are banished and rejected, but also at the level of society and history, only economic institutions matter. Economic events that he called the material aspects of society, they determine what happens in the world. Values do not matter, religion do not matter, philosophical ideas do not matter, legal ideas, concepts do not matter. They are all reflections and determined by the material factors, which becomes the economic factors and economic structures and so on. And in any case, the turning point from 1844 is towards this materialistic worldview, and one expression of that is Marxist theory. And the other expression, a few years from now, from 1844, Darwin publishes his book, and that becomes an occasion for emergence of a social and political interpretation of Darwinism, which becomes social Darwinism, which ultimately argues that since humans are just an animal, part of nature, there is no God, there is no soul. For that reason, the laws of nature, namely a struggle for existence, should operate at the level of society. And so social Darwinism becomes justification of war, justification of colonialism, justification of racism, and all other forms of violence. Because in this theory, that is the law of the nature, that is a struggle for existence, which causes progress. And so humanity is not defined as the image of God, all defined as with dignity. Humanity becomes a bundle of different traits in the process of evolution. And some groups of humans are more advanced than some other groups of humans and so on. You can see how easily racism, for example, becomes justified through this reduction of human beings to the materialistic levels. In any case, these three forms of doctrines become the most important, most influential philosophies of not only 19th century, but 20th century and 21st century. And influenced by this materialistic worldview, the world becomes obsessed with identity, but identity is defined simply in terms of what differentiates us from each other. And it is defined in terms of biological factors and group characteristics. So for instance, in the case of the US, what is our true nature? What is our true identity? Identity is usually reduced to race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and the like. Sometimes it is nationality, it is language, and other factors. But the obsession with identity has become dominant, influenced by this materialistic philosophy. And of course, this means that our identity is defined in terms of what separates us from each other. So the other groups becomes either strangers or enemies. So if I'm a member of this particular nation, if I'm a member of this particular ethnicity, of this particular gender, and so on, and my identity is reduced to that, then it means others are strangers or enemies. And you can see how this conception of identity becomes very difficult to bring unity, to bring justice, to bring love as regulating principles of society. For the case of the Bab, what I just said, the symbolic meaning of the word Bab, the word gate, it is the exact opposite. We are a finite being with characteristics which differentiates us from each other, whose truth is divinity. Our divinity as image of God, that is our ultimate truth. And in that sense, we are all one. Not only we are one, we are all sacred, we are all beautiful. Not only all human beings, but all beings, nature. In the writings of the Bab, nature has moral rights. Frequently, Bab talks about paradise, heaven, and hell becoming also characteristics of natural things. Unlike the previous religious conceptions who think that heaven and hell is just for humans, for the Bab, everything has heaven or hell. And the Bab talks about realization of the potentialities as heaven. For everything, realization, actualization of its potentialities is heaven. And deprivation from realization of those potentialities is hell. So if we are polluting waters, we are condemning waters to hell. If we are not enriching the world, if we are not educating people to realize their potentialities, their spiritual potentialities, and so on, we are condemning them to hell. So we contribute, human beings, to the destiny of people and things and the world and nature, environment, to be in hell or heaven. And the Bab frequently says that human beings have this moral responsibility, responsibility to everyone and everything, that to the extent of our capacity, help things, help people to reach their heaven, reach their paradise. All of these are possible because we are reflections of God. That is our truth. What is our identity? Our true identity is that everything is a reflection of God. That is why this metaphor of mirror is so important in the writings of the Bab and also in the Baha'i writings. Everything becomes mirrors of God. And mirror is, of course, a piece of glass. And this mirror is different from other pieces. The glasses are different, their sizes are different, their colors are different, and their shapes are different. But these different glasses become vehicle of reception of the image of the sun. The sun and the rays of the sun are being reflected in this glass, and that defines the mirror. The mirror, therefore, consists of two aspects. It has a glass, and it has the image of the sun. It has the image of God. Reflection of that image in the mirror is the divinity of the mirror. Now, this also means that we are not God. This is very important. Everything has divinity, but our divinity is a reflection of divine names and attributes within us. In the same way that the sun, which is reflected in the mirror, is not the same as the sun in heaven. The sun in heaven does not come down and descend into the mirror. But at the same time, the image of the sun is reflected in this mirror, and that's the ultimate truth of the mirror. We are all divine. Everything is divine. And that means that you are signs of God, image of God, manifestations of God. But at the same time, God remains in his or her or its absolute transcendence. So the word Bab, among other meanings, it has so many meanings, is expression of the structure of reality. Everything consists of these two aspects, divinity and servitude, and coming together of these two, existence and essence. And among other things that the Bab discusses is that, for example, my actions as a human being consist also of two directions. One direction is the effulgence of God. So whatever I do is caused by God, is determined by God. If there is no will of God, nothing exists. I can do nothing. And yet at the same time, because I am a specific being, I have a specific essence, so my action is also caused by and reflected by particular characteristics that I have. And so everything becomes simultaneously divine will and simultaneously a free choice of that particular being. So in the writings of the Bab, he resolves the question of absolute determinism, that everything is caused by God and nothing has any freedom of choice. And at the same time, the idea of absolute free will and the like. For the Bab, these two do not contradict each other, and their modality of existence and causation is also different. So because of this unity of infinity and finite character of humanity, we are free. And yet everything that we do can become possible by the will of God, by the grace of God, and the like. Another, of course, very important meaning of this gate is that the Bab becomes a gate for the next stage of a spiritualization of humanity. As I mentioned, gate connects two different aspects. So the present level of a spiritual capacities of humanity, symbolized by the religion of the Bab, and the next stage of a spiritualization of humanity, a higher stage of actualization of the spiritual potentialities of humanity, symbolized by the next prophet of God that the Bab calls that he whom God shall make manifest, or Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. So the Bab becomes also a gate to the next manifestation of God, next stage of development of the spiritual capacities of humanity. But it has so many meanings. But I stopped discussing the Bab because otherwise we have to be here for a long time. I try to discuss other titles much more concisely, so that hopefully in 10 minutes I finish, and then we can have discussions and if there are questions and so on. So one other title of the Bab is Zikr. Zikr means remembrance of remembrance. And many times it's Zikr of God, Zikrullah, which becomes remembrance of God. In his first book, after his declaration, which is commentary on the Quranic chapter of Joseph, a commentary on the story of Joseph, which has the biblical source, but it is also repeated in the Quran. The Bab constantly calls himself remembrance, Zikr, remembrance of God, Zikr. And it's very important to realize what this word remembrance as the title of the Bab may mean. Here the Bab is connecting Quran and Torah together. And that's, of course, one of the main reasons that he chose as the occasion for his revelation, for beginning of his revelation, to interpret the story of Joseph, because the story of Joseph connects Judaism, Christianity, and Islam together. Joseph, and the story of Joseph is mentioned, of course, in Torah, and is sacred as part of the Bible for both Jewish and Christians. And also one chapter of the Quran is about the story of Joseph. And so even by choice of this really text to be the manifesto of the emergence of the new spiritual civilization, that the Bab is bringing us, he chooses something that unites all these religions rather than divides them and puts them at odds with each other. But the word zikr that he frequently also mentions, this is mentioned in that text as title of the Bab, has extremely deep mystical meanings. Usually, a little bit of that is understood by some scholars and discussed, but the heart of that has been, in my judgment, not yet properly studied. So let me first mention the Quranic meaning of the word zikr, remembrance. As I mentioned, this is in the context of interpreting the story of Joseph in the Quran, okay? Now, in the Quran, the way the story of Joseph is mentioned is that first the story is mentioned, which begins by the dream of Joseph when he's a child, and ends the story by the realization of that dream, fulfillment of that dream, in the sense that Joseph becomes the sovereign of Egypt. And in the Quran, the last part of the story is that Joseph tells his father, Jacob, that this is the realization and the meaning of the dream that I had in my childhood. At this time, the story is finished. And right immediately after that, God says that this is my zikr for the people of the world. In other words, Quran itself is defining the Quranic chapter of Joseph, the story of Joseph in the Quran, as the zikr of God for the people of the world. In other words, the Quran itself, the word of God, describing the story of Joseph, that becomes zikr. In other parts of the Quran also, Quran in general is defined as zikr, as remembrance. Zikr both means remembrance and also word, mention of God. So in the case of the Quran, as it is discussed in the very story of Joseph, zikr becomes the Quran itself. Zikr becomes the word of God itself, which in this chapter is describing the story of Joseph. And this is extremely important. Namely, when the Bab is calling himself zikr, in interpretation of the story of Joseph, he's referring to that statement in the Quran, in that same chapter, which defines the Quran as remembrance of God for the world. In other words, Quran is defining the word of God, Quran itself, as zikr. And that is the truth of the prophets of God. That is their divinity. So prophets of God also are reflections of God. They have divinity, but they are also created by God, and they are servants of God, which is their servitude. But of course, they are a type of mirror which is transparent, and therefore this divinity is manifest in them with full actualization and glory. We are all reflections and shadows of this, but at the level of the prophets of God, this becomes unique. So the Bab is defining himself as the word of God, as the logos, as the word that in gospel is discussed as the ultimate reality of everything, which is God, but at the same time, it is not God, which becomes the secret of Trinity. The Trinity becomes this structure that I mentioned, that we have divinity, and yet we are created by divinity. And coming together of these two becomes Father and becomes Son and becomes Holy Ghost. So everything is Father, namely is divine. but not Father in heaven, but reflection of Father in this world. And at the same time, we are the Son, we are created by God, separate from God. And yet, the unity of these two defines ultimately what we are. So, in the writings of the Bab, the concept of cross also becomes symbol of the unity of divinity and servitude. And so the whole story that I talked about, the meaning of the Bab, becomes manifest in this new understanding of Trinity and the like. So now we understand the meaning of zikr, remembrance, in its Quranic source. Let me now mention that the ultimate meaning of this word remembrance goes back to Torah, preceding Quran. And that particular meaning is very dear to the Bab. In his writings, he is so enchanted by this idea. In Torah, the story of Moses is mentioned in this way, that Moses sees that there is fire on mountain, and he goes there, and he sees this bush which is burning. And then God speaks to Moses, and the story is mentioned, of course, in Torah, repeated a number of times in the Quran as well. And after God talks to Moses, Moses tells God, now when I go back to people and they ask me what is the name of this God, what should I say? And then God says in Hebrew, original Hebrew, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I am that I am, or I am that I would be. I am that I am. God defines himself, God, as I am that I am. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Now, in Torah, right after this statement, immediately after this, God continues saying that, now, again, I mentioned the original Hebrew, Zezekeri. Zezekeri, this is my zekr. In Hebrew, zekr is zeker, the same. This is my zekr. Again, for future generations and people in eternity and the like. So what is zekr? Torah is defining the self-description of God, the self-definition of God. When God defines himself as I am that I am, God defines that self-description of God by God as his zekr, his remembrance for eternity, for all people of the world. The way this is translated in English and other languages, if you just read that, it is impossible that you understand the connection with this concept of zekr, remembrance that the Bab is talking about. But if you read it in original Hebrew, it is so manifest because the word is the same, zekr, zekr. So what is zekr in Torah? What is this remembrance? It refers to the self-description of God. We cannot know God. And therefore, God, out of divine love and mercy, defines and describes himself for us. That self-description of God, which is at our levels, is not the ultimate reality of God because we cannot know that. But the reality of God as it can be reflected in the world, as it can be understood in the world. That self-description of God for us, this is zekr, this is the Bab. And for the Bab, the truth of all prophets of God is this. They are this ultimate reflection of God in this world. They are ultimate reflection of divinity in this world. self-description of God in this world. And so this concept of zikr not only is bringing Quran and Torah together, but also at the same time is affirming that a spiritual worldview, that theological, that philosophical message, that concept of identity, and so on. He also defines himself as the most exalted, or the most exalted Lord. The word for Lord in Arabic and in the Quran is Rab. The word rabbi in English is related to this same word. Lord is something that nurtures. And from that, in Arabic and Persian, we have tarbiyat, murabbi, and so on. All goes back to the word Rab, God, Lord, as a reality which nurtures everything. Now, why the Bab defines himself as Lord, as a Rab? The reason is, in a sense, the same things that I have discussed so far. But in Arabic, every alphabetical letter has a meaning. Every alphabetical letter has a number, has a numerical value. So A is 1, B is 2, J is 3, D is 4, H, a particular H, is 5, V or W is 6, and it continues. From 1, it goes to 9, and then from 10, it goes to 99, and then from 100, it goes to 1,000. From 1 to 1,000, all Arabic alphabetical letters, 28 of them, are defined as having a particular value. Now, the word Rab, which is Lord, the Lord, consists of two letters, R and B. R is 200, and B is 2. So Rab is equal to 202. Now, it happens that the name of the Bab, which is Ali Muhammad, the sum of the numerical value of its letters is also 202. Ali is 110, Muhammad is 92. So Ali Muhammad together becomes 202, which is equivalent of Rab. So the name of the Bab, Ali Muhammad, becomes symbol of the Lord. It is reflection of Rab, the transcendental Rab of God in this world. The image of sun in heaven as it is manifested in the mirror. The reflection of God in this world becomes different prophets of God. All of them are Lord, not the transcendental Lord, not the sun in heaven, but the reflection of that sun in the mirror of realities of the world. And so the word Rab, it symbolizes again the ultimate truth of not only the prophets of God, but ultimate truth of everything. The writings of the Bab, in every form, wants to spiritualize reality, spiritualize consciousness, that we see in everything reflections of God. And the ultimate message of this is that everything becomes beautiful and sacred and endowed with rights. Everything is ultimately one. And therefore, creation of a culture, not a culture of struggle for existence that social Darwinism was talking about it. Not a culture of reduction of identity and the war of this group against this group on the basis of gender, on the basis of race, on the basis of religion, on the basis of nationality, on the basis of political philosophy or other things, but rather the unity and oneness of all humanity as spiritual beings, as reflections of God. That is the ultimate message of God in everything that he discusses. And these are also symbolized by his title. The most exalted Lord, Rabbi A'la, the most exalted, has a lot of meanings. It is the superlative of Ali, which is his name. Ali Muhammad. Ali is his name. Ali is one of the names of God in the Quran. Means exalted or the most exalted. Ali. Quran frequently talks about God as Ali, Aliyan Kabira, Aliyan Azima. Ali is also the name of the successor of Prophet Muhammad. But the main meaning of Ali is one of the names of God, represents divinity of reality. Muhammad is the name of the prophet of God. Prophet as the servant of God, not the divinity, but receiving revelations from God. So the name of the Bab, which is Ali Muhammad, is another symbolic reference that his reality is divinity, Ali, one of the names of God, and Muhammad, prophet, created, servant of God. The unification of divinity and servitude, that is the truth of the Bab, and that is the truth of Muhammad, that is the truth of Jesus, that is the truth of Krishna, that is the truth of Buddha and all Baha'u'llah and all prophets of God. And so the most exalted Lord in various forms, these are also expressing that ultimate philosophical conception that I mentioned. The most perhaps important title of the Bab, Primal Point, I can't discuss the details of that, unfortunately, because of lack of time. But the point, the Bab becomes a point. Point doesn't have any particular determination. It doesn't have a size. It doesn't have extension. Although it doesn't have a determination, it is the source of everything. So the point and repetitions and reflections of the point creates first alphabet. And out of alphabets, words and sentences and books and so on are created. The Bab is the point, just as Muhammad was the point, just as Jesus was the point, just as Moses was the point, Buddha was the point. It's the reality which becomes the source of creation of a new civilization. The first elements of this civilization becomes letters, alphabetical letters. And so for the Bab, his first 18 believers are letters of the living. These letters are the first expressions coming to life out of revelation of this point. And then out of combination of these letters, of course, civilization comes into existence. That is also symbolized in the calendar of the Bab, that the point together with 18 letters become 19. And then reflection of this 19 times 19 becomes 361, which becomes a year plus intercalary days. And 361 in Arabic becomes equal to the word kull shay, all things. So all things numerically is equal to 361. So what is the message of the concept of the point? What does it mean? It means that all things, their truth is one and the same, and that's the point, reflection of the point. Although all things are different from each other, but all things like 361, like a year, it consists of reflections of 19. But that 19 is reflection of the point. And so in all things, you have to see the point, and that's the truth of everything. Another affirmation of the unity of all beings, of the spiritual reality of all beings, of the dignity and beauty, sacredness of all beings. And that unity in diversity becomes the philosophy of the Bab and Baha'i faith, that we find diversity accompanied by fundamental truth of us, which is our divine unity. And because of that unity, this diversity becomes beautiful and becomes occasion for interaction, communication, mutual recognition, consultation, and consorting with each other and so on. That is the meaning of diversity in the Baha'i faith and its notion of identity. Since I mentioned that, I mentioned it in 1 minute, that the Bab frequently talks of himself as possessor of 7 letters. Immediately, of course, this means that he's Ali Muhammad. As I mentioned, Ali consists of 3 letters, A-L-I. And Muhammad consists of 4 letters. When you write it in English, it becomes more because vowels are not written as an alphabet in Arabic. Muhammad is M-H-M-D in Arabic, the way you write it. So Ali Muhammad consists of 7 letters. But although this is true, and we have seen that this Ali Muhammad becomes symbol of God and prophet, divinity and creation, together becomes 202, which is equivalent of Rab, namely Lord, and so on. But in addition to all these things, the Bab is the possessor of 7 letters, and these 7 letters refer to the affirmation of God, affirmation of the unity of God. Islam is based upon ultimate belief in the unity of God, and that is mentioned in one statement: there is none other God but God, which first is negation. You negate anything other than God. There is none other God. La ilaha. First you negate everything. And then you affirm. You say, illallah, save God, accept God. The word which affirms save God, accept God. There is none other God, but God, save God. Depends on the translation. Is illallah. This illallah consists of 7 letters. So these 7 letters that the Bab becomes possessors of that, Lord of that. Although it is also Ali Muhammad, but ultimately it is affirmation of divine unity, illallah, save God, but God. There is none other God but God, save God. And this becomes the truth of everything. So it is not the case that for the Baha'i faith and in the religion of the Bab, the world is bad and evil and things like that, and then prophets are good and God is really good. All realities, their truth is reflection of God. Nature, the material world, is sacred, is spiritual. The binary opposition between God and the world is eliminated. The truth of everything is divine reflection and divine image. I stop at this point. And if there are questions or comments, I'll be happy to hear them. I can't hear you.
I said, thank you so much, Dr. Saiedi. That was really wonderful. There are several questions in the chat. So I'd like to go through the chat really quick before I go to the individuals who have their hands raised. One of the questions is from Catherine. She asks that she wants to know if there is a mystical significance of the number 42 in the Baha'i faith.
Yes. The religion of the Bab, as I mentioned, comes through the declaration of the Bab, and the declaration of the Bab manifests itself through writing this commentary on the chapter of Joseph. As I mentioned, the way in the Quran, the story of Joseph is mentioned is in this way, that Joseph, who is a child, sees a dream. He has a dream and comes and tells the father about that dream. And the dream is that he sees, if I remember, sun and the moon and 11 stars that are all bow down before him, prostrate before him. Now, in the Quran, the word before him, namely for him, they all bow down for him, before him, is li. And li namely for me, before me, is equal to 40. L is 30 and Y is 10. So Li becomes 40. Now the Bab takes this and plays with that and notes that the word for yea, namely yes, namely when God asked all beings, am I not thy Lord? The word replies by saying yes, Bala or Bali. This word Bala or Bali is B plus that word Li before me. B is 2, so Bala, yes, yea, is equal to 42. But for the Bab, this Bala is another expression of that Li before me. Everything prostrates before me in that dream. So by playing with this, 42 becomes symbol of covenant of God. According to the Quran, God, before actual creation of everything, gathered the truth of everything and asked them, am I not thy Lord? Alastu berabbekum. Am I not thy Lord? Rab, the word that we were talking about. Alastu berabbekum. Am I not thy Lord? And according to Quran, all reality, truth, responded and said, Bala, yea, yes, Bala. This word Bala, namely affirmation of covenant, becomes 42. It's B-L-Y, Bala. But the B has its own mystical symbolism, which becomes symbol of Baha, and Li has its symbolic mysticism that I just mentioned. And this is very important. The concept of covenant is reinterpreted in the Baha'i religion. And at the end of this session, probably before it begins to be recorded, dear Nader mentioned something about the new definition of religion in the writings of the Bab. That is ultimately this concept of covenant. Namely, religion is a dialogue between God and humanity. This covenant of God, religion is a covenant of God. Religion is not just will of God imposed on humanity. Religion becomes a dialogue, interaction between God and humanity. So the wisdom of God is not for God. Religion is not for God. If it was for God, it would be absolute, unchanging. Religion is for our development, our spiritualization. But we are contingent, we are historical, we are changing, we are dynamic. So the wisdom of God has to manifest itself in the mirror of our reality, which changes. And so each religion, all different religions, although the truth is one and the same, divine wisdom and divine truth, but it has to manifest itself in new forms and new ways, corresponding to the characteristics and needs of humanity, which changes and is dynamic. And so for that reason, all religions, their truth become one. Although they are different, their truth is one. And we have to look at that common truth. The difference is because of the historical exigencies, and they are secondary aspects of religion. Unfortunately, the clerics of different religions are obsessed with these secondary tokens of religion. And for that reason, although religions are all for the sake of love and unity among humanity, by obsessing with those secondary manifestations, historical manifestations of religion, they cause enmity and conflict and hatred among religious groups. And therefore, religion becomes a cause of disunity and hatred, which one of the fundamental principles of the Baha'i faith is that religion should be a cause of love and unity. Otherwise, it is better not to have religion. So Bala is 42, becomes symbol of this divine covenant and the like.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Rob Vidovi, when you were mentioning the second, or actually the third title of the Bab, Remembrance, you mentioned I am that I am from the Torah. He wants to know if there is a relationship between that statement, I am that I am, and the words, here am I, in the Baha'i long obligatory prayer.
Well, I'm sure in terms of meanings, they are related. I have to look and see the original word for here I am, what it is to be able to answer correctly. But in any case, that is the ultimate self-description of God, which is defining God as a condition of all essences and characteristics and attributes, but at the same time transcending them all, like the point, which is not anything specific, but it causes everything. So fire and water are opposed to each other, but both of them are created out of the point. The point is the unity of opposites. It's neither water nor fire, but it's all. God, I am that I am, by affirming its reality, not in terms of these characteristics or that characteristic, this attribute or that attribute, but the source of all reality, the source of all oppositions, the source of all things and so on, is affirming transcendence of God and yet the presence of God in everything. It is very important to mention that this Ehye Asher Ehye, I am that I am, was so important to the Bab and to Baha'u'llah that the Bab, in a number of his Arabic writings, he writes the original Hebrew word for this. Namely, he writes Ehye Asher Ehye. But since this word in Arabic doesn't mean anything, when people read that, they think that there should be somebody that should have made mistake in writing, in transcription. In the writings of the Bab, like his commentary on the Surah of Kawthar, and in writings of Baha'u'llah, this is frequently mentioned in the form of, you can read it in Arabic as Bahiya Sherahiya, Bahiyan Sherahiya, Bahiya Sherahiya. But what it is, it really is, it's Be Ehye Asher Ehye, Bahiyan Sherahiya. It's not Bahiyan Sherahiya, it's Be Ehye Asher Ehye. And so the concept was so dear to the Bab. I mentioned that this story of encounter, mystical encounter of Moses and God through burning bush, is the ultimate symbol of mysticism and the spiritual reality of all beings. The Bab loves this so much that this Ehye Asher Ehye, he even mentions in Arabic alphabets the original Hebrew word, which was unknown, of course, to his audience, and it's not understood. And Baha'u'llah does the same.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to?
I didn't answer the question directly because I don't know. I have to check, but I said something additional.
No, thank you very much. This one is from Paul Mantle with regards to the story of Joseph. In the book, Light of the World, Abdul Baha refers to all of us as buyers. Some buyers appear as positive, it seems, and others not. Could you elaborate on this?
Well, the concept of buyer, seller, buying, selling is a very important concept in sacred scriptures. In the Quran, you frequently find the metaphor of market metaphors, particularly buying and selling, frequently mentioned, not once or twice, and so on. So the religion of God and the message of God, the divine values and truth, becomes something that that is offered to people, that people, unfortunately, they can buy this so easily this so precious reality, but usually they don't, and they buy materialistic orientations and selfish and immoral ways of looking at the world and so on. And of course, they would lose. So the best trait, or unfrequently mentions, the best trait is buying these spiritual truths by the people. They pay a little, but what they get is infinite and so on. So this is a general idea. But in the story of Joseph also, this question of buying and selling is mentioned a number of times. When Joseph is taken out of the well and is sold in Egypt, he is sold with a very inexpensive price, with this low price, although he was the most beautiful and he symbolizes the beauty of God and the wisdom of God and the capacity to interpret the dream. It's very important that the story of Joseph defines Joseph as beautiful and in terms of his capacity, power to interpret dreams. You remember that. He became sovereign of Egypt because he could interpret dreams. And the Bab is now interpreting the story of Joseph and affirming his sovereignty and the fact that he is also Joseph through the same capacity, through interpreting. He's interpreting the story of Joseph, including the dream of Joseph and the interpretations of those dreams. The Bab is interpreting all of it. It's so beautiful. I mean, the connections of all these things. But these Egyptians bought Joseph, this ultimate, beautiful, absolute reality, with a cheap price. And of course, the caravan leaders sold him with cheap price. Didn't know the value of Joseph and so on. So later on in the story of connection of Joseph to his brothers and so on, selling and buying become relevant. But Abdul Baha, who is master of metaphors, I mean, I find nobody so ultimately capable of expressing the ultimate complex spiritual truth in terms of very simple, easy to understand metaphors and so on. He uses these potentialities of the story of Joseph also for these purposes.
Okay, I want to go to Mary Rose. Please ask your question.
Thank you very much, Nader, and of course, Dr. Saiedi. When you were describing, or at least this is my understanding, that the Bab becomes the gate for the next stage of the spiritualization of humanity. If we look at that cross with the two horizontal and the one vertical, does that mean the Bab is all of those three, or is the Bab one of those lines that then connects with the next cross, so to speak?
A very perceptive point, and the answer, as you noted, is present in your question, is that both. Okay. In one sense, he's all of them as reflection of the structure of all reality being the unity of both. And at the same time, he is that vertical line which is now connecting the future to the past.
Both. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Parveen. Parveen, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
It's just a quick and short question. I'm familiar with the Bab, Nuqtay Ula, Zekr, this sort of thing. But what's the Persian for 7 letters?
Zat huruf sab. or in Arabic, Zat al-Huruf Sab. Actually, I wrote here in the first pages of Persian Bayan, the Bab refers to himself as Zat Huruf Sab. Zat is possessor or lord of. Huruf is letters, Sab is 7. So Zat Huruf Sab is possessor of 7 letters. And so in the very first page of Persian Bayan, he refers to himself as Zat Huruf Sab, possessor of 7 letters. In the first pages of Arabic Bayan, he says that in Zat Huruf Sab Babullah, and so on. Namely, verily, the possessor of 7 letters is the gate of God for all reality. So both at the beginning, actually in the first page of Persian Bayan, and at the very early stage of Arabic Bayan, he is referred as Zat Huruf Sab, the possessor of 7 letters. And as I mentioned, normally this is understood as being Ali Muhammad, because Ali Muhammad consists of 7 letters. But when you read what he is really saying in the beginning of Persian Bayan, which the existing Persian Bayan is mistakenly mentioned, omitting one word there. And for that reason, it is impossible to know what he really is saying. But what he really is saying, which is slightly different from the way that in the actual published Persian Bayan you can see, over there you can see that these 7 letters refers to affirmation of God, illallah. But in any case, both of them, of course, are true.
Thank you very much.
Okay, yes, thank you. Milagros, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, thank you for this talk. When you mentioned this, if I understood this right, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars, and God said, I am your Lord, and the response was back, yes. It made me think of our indigenous way of all our relations, how we're all interconnected and we're all spiritual. Everything on Mother Earth is spiritual because it is in essence, if I wrote this down, servitude, our essence is of the Creator and it is spiritual. So I just wanted to thank you for that because it was the sun and the moon and 11 stars. It just was very, thank you.
You're most welcome, and your point is completely to the point. In fact, as I mentioned today, I decided to discuss the worldview of the Bab through his titles. Previously, I wanted to discuss it in different ways. And in those different ways, you'll see that all different aspects of the world, nature, including the 4 elements, fire, water, air, and dust, earth, become symbols of all these spiritual truths. And so nature becomes this manifestation of God. Everything in nature becomes sacred. And this is something that not only you find it's so beautifully developed in Native American spirituality, but also you find it in Zoroastrianism, the original native religion of Iran, in which all elements of nature, including fire and water and things like that, are extremely sacred and beautiful, and the duty of protecting them and so on. So as I mentioned, the writings of the Bab in the most glorious fashion eliminates the traditional understanding in some clerical understanding of religion, eliminates this supposed opposition of God to the material world. The material world becomes bad, God is good, and so on. For the Bab, all reality becomes spiritualized. So everything everything is intoxicated with God. Everything is spiritual. And that is ultimately the message of the Bab for humanity. And when you read the writings of Abdul Baha, the same Abdul Baha who was born at that same night that the Bab declared his mission, you'll see that so clearly he is seeing the ultimate cause of the problem of the world, whether it is in the West or in the East, as forgetting our spiritual truth, forgetting the spiritual truth of reality. And so this call for a spiritual return to our truth, that becomes the ultimate, most essential imperative of this age.
Neda, Neda,
Excuse me?
sorry, can I pose one? I don't know how to use that sign with the hand up. I don't know where to press for that, but I just wanted to mention or bring another point on the long obligatory prayer. Hi, Dr. Neda. It's been a while since Michigan days when we first met. The long obligatory prayer says in the Kulashe point or vision of Kulashe that all things are of God. And then it acknowledges at the end of the prayer where we look up to the sky and say the kingdoms of earth and heaven are thine, O Lord of all the worlds. And given that we've been given this wonderful 9-year plan, I was hoping, how can we reach out mystically or spiritually to all those creation of God to join forces, I guess, a joint energy to assist us in marching on for this 9-year plan?
Well, that is a topic of another discussion. Another person. I'm not really that qualified to give a more adequate answer to that question. But I just wanted to mention indirectly the word that you mentioned, that all things belong to God, or I forgot the way in English it was mentioned. That word, that everything is for God or belongs to God, is lillah in its original Arabic, lillah. And is one of the most frequently discussed concepts in the writings of the Bab. Lillah means for God, for the sake of God, belonging. All things belong to God. Quran, for instance, mentions, and the Bible also mentions that everything belongs to God, everything is God's. The word in Arabic for that is lillah. Everything is for God, for the sake of God. And lillah consists of 3 L and 1 H, which in terms of its numerical value is equal to 95. And so 95 becomes so important in the laws of the Bab, also in the Baha'i faith. For instance, 95 times we are supposed to mention Allahu Abha. The reason for that ultimately goes back to this idea that the Bab emphasizes so much, so frequent in his writing, that everything that we do should be for the sake of God, should not be for selfish reasons, but should be for the service of the entire reality, for all things. And so it should be for God and for the sake of God. So this concept of all things belong to God, all things are God's, and so on, take new meanings and new interpretations and become historicized and so on through this, through writings of the Bab and so on, which is very fascinating. But I just hinted at that.
Okay, thank you. We have one last
yes, that should be the last
from the
question.
chat. Yeah, so one last one, and thank you so much for your time. Alex Boyson, he wants to know if Ella La can also be understood as faqat Allah or something similar. So illallah, that could be the same as faqat Allah.
It can be, but illallah is magar Khuda. If you want to translate it in Persian, it's magar Khuda. That's why there's no other God save God, but God, magar Khuda. But the word faqat only is not inaccurate, but is not directly the reference to that. By the way, this illallah, and this is my last point, namely save God, but God, which is symbol of the affirmation of divine unity. In one of his writings of the Bab, that one of the letters of the living asked him when this Baha'u'llah, when this he whom God shall make manifest would appear, and how we should know him and so on. It's one of the most important works of the Bab. One of the things that he says, calculate the numerical value of the word lillah with tashdid. Now the word lillah, which I said that it is for the sake of God and so on, is related to this illallah. So the Bab says, count the numerical value of huruf isbat, illallah, the letters of affirmation. So not lillah, but illallah. If I say lillah, I made a mistake. But illallah and lillah are all related to each other. So illallah, save God, but God. The Bab is predicting, giving us the nature of the next revelation here. Because illallah consists of 7 letters. But one of the letters has tashdid, namely it is pronounced twice. And the Bab is saying that calculate tashdid as well. In that case, it becomes 8, illallah, which refers to the end of the year 8 and the beginning of the year 9, which is when Baha'u'llah revealed. But at the same time, the word illallah, if you calculate it with tashdid, namely one of the L would be added to that, is equal to the word Hussein, which is the name of Baha'u'llah. So the numerical value of the word for Hussein, Baha'u'llah, is illallah. But illallah with tashdid, so it becomes when you say illah, in fact, we pronounce it 2L, but when you write it, it is one Allah. But the Bab says calculate that additional. Then illallah, this word of affirmation of divine unity, becomes equal to the name of Baha'u'llah Hussein. So in this statement, the Bab is saying what year he would appear and what would be the name of the next manifestation of God. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Nader, for inviting me.
No, of course, no, thank you so much. I know you're so busy, and truly thank you for taking the time and really helping us to understand and appreciate our faith. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nader.
Bye,
Allahu
everyone.
Akbar. Thank you, Nader.
Thank you, Dr. Saiedi.
Allah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much.
Thank you.